Sector 9Z had always been marked as dead space, a forgotten stretch of dark sky where even the boldest explorers avoided setting course, its only features being broken asteroids, flickering echoes of ancient wars, and the collapsed remains of a wormhole that once led to nowhere. But now, for the first time in centuries, ships returned, hundreds of them, engines humming in perfect formation, as the Corthan Armada, the largest battle fleet ever built under the United Dominion, moved into position for what was meant to be a routine sweep of nearby colonies. Their objective was simple: secure the neutral territories beyond the drift zone, expand their influence, and erase any scattered resistance before it could rise. But as the lead formations began weaving through the outer edge of the wreck field, the forward scout ship transmitted a single-word alert: unidentified. The message repeated once more before cutting out. At first, Command thought it was a system glitch. Wreck fields often interfered with signals, and sensor ghosts were common. But when another scout confirmed visual contact, the fleet slowed. Hidden behind the rolling layers of ion clouds was something massive, still, and unregistered. It wasn't part of any known structure, didn't match any colonial ruin, and most of all, it wasn't debris. It was intact. Angular plates curved inward like armor grown instead of built. Deep black metal, too smooth for age, sat undisturbed, reflecting none of the background radiation around it. The scout ship's AI initiated a passive scan, but the signal returned scrambled, distorted as if the data was being rejected or misdirected. Then the fog parted just enough for the main Armada to see it with their own optics. A single warship, massive and silent, resting in space without motion or signal, yet somehow impossible to ignore. There were no active lights, no energy pulses, and no recognizable insignia. Yet every Corthan ship in the fleet, whether small corvette or towering dreadnought, received the same quiet sensation through their sensors. They were being watched. Not in the usual tactical sense, not in a scanner's cold logic, but as though the ship itself was aware. The Corthan generals aboard the flagship, hardened veterans of 10 campaigns, stood in silence as visual data fed into the command chamber. One commander muttered it must be a hidden defense platform, perhaps a Council-era relic. Another insisted it could be a cloaked enemy vessel, using an outdated decoy shell. But no theory explained why none of their thousands of ships could get a clear read, or why, when they tried to approach closer, their navigation systems subtly nudged their courses away without alert. It was as if their own ships refused to draw nearer. Even the oldest warships, those that had never known fear, began to slow. The Admiral, Lord Korath, a figure known for never hesitating in the face of danger, stared at the black silhouette of the ship and felt, for the first time in decades, a sense of hesitation he could not explain. There was something about it that touched an instinct too old to trace, like the quiet before a storm or the weight of eyes in the dark. The flagship's AI, designed for tactical analysis, delivered only one sentence: unknown class, unknown origin. Recommend withdrawal or full fleet alert, but no one moved. No commands were given. It wasn't fear of an enemy. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around the soul and told it to listen. Generals conferred across channels, analysts ran simulations, but nothing worked. Every angle returned the same result. The ship was there, fully powered down, fully intact, but resistant to every known scan. It didn't threaten, it didn't speak, it just existed. And that, more than any weapon, was what made the entire Corthan Armada stop. In the void of space where noise doesn't travel, presence does, and this vessel carried it like a blade across the stars. The lower officers began whispering to each other, speaking of old tales told in training barracks rumors about a species that once defied the Council, vanished without trace, and was said to have built ships too advanced for the time. A species believed extinct, a species called human. Of course, the higher officers dismissed its stories, meant for caution drills and bedtime fear. But no one could deny that whatever this ship was, it did not belong to the known galaxy. It belonged to something else, something older, something that had been waiting. And as the Armada held position, hovering like a beast uncertain whether it had stumbled into a trap, the warship remained still silent, unmoving and dark. But every ship in the fleet now agreed on one thing. Even without orders, they would not fire first. They would not approach unless commanded. Because even without knowing its name, the Korthans understood what their instincts were screaming. This ship wasn't meant to be found. As the unknown warship continued to drift in silence above the wreck field, the Korthan Armada remained on edge, its full strength held back not by force, but by uncertainty. On every flagship, commanders demanded answers, flooding their data channels with requests to central archives, intelligence vaults, and council-sanctioned history servers. Every available database was scanned war records, exploration logs, even the sealed files from before the Great Unity. But nothing matched. The warship's hull composition exceeded known density readings. Its design held no cultural markers from any registered species. The surface showed signs of atmospheric wear, yet the armor was untouched by decay. One science officer ran a composite check on the energy signatures, and the analysis software failed, returning only 2 words: unknown origin. High Command, frustrated by the lack of identification, contacted a Central Relic Center on Verax Prime to consult the oldest ship designs from the first builders, the mythical species believed to have pioneered interstellar engines thousands of cycles ago. But even those ancient references held nothing like what they were facing now. Then came a mistake, or perhaps fate. A junior analyst aboard a Korthan vessel accessed an old research node, accidentally decrypting a restricted file buried beneath diplomatic reports from a forgotten era. It was a half-corrupted entry, incomplete, but one line was intact. Terran Strike Class, Status, Unknown. Threat Level, Do Not Engage. No visual, no details. Just a name, Terran, and a warning. Suddenly, whispers spread among the crew, then across the entire fleet. Not every soldier remembered the old stories, but the veterans did. The name, Terran, wasn't new, it was ancient, buried under layers of myth, used in cautionary tales told in military camps. They spoke of a species that had once stood against the forming council, rejecting unification, refusing to submit to any galactic order. According to legend, they vanished after a final stand, not destroyed, but choosing disappearance over surrender. Many believed they were wiped out. Others thought they had simply gone into hiding. But none had seen a human in over 200 years. The Korthan High Command dismissed the rumors as superstition. They said the Terran stories were created to explain vanished colonies and missing fleets during the early expansion wars. But Admiral Varex, an old strategist who rarely spoke without purpose, was not convinced. Sitting alone in his command chamber, he reviewed the footage of the ship again and again. Its lines were not decorative. Its form wasn't built for intimidation. It was engineered with precision like a blade hidden in a cloth sheath. Without permission from the fleet's council, Varex authorized a small boarding team, a quiet insertion of 5 trained specialists who would approach in a stealth pod and attempt contact. They were ordered not to harm anything, only observe and report. The pod launched silently, gliding toward the dark ship's surface under a minimal energy signature. As it passed the outer sensor range, something changed. No light, no motion. But all across the Korthan Armada, alarms triggered at once. Thousands of targeting systems lit up. The unknown ship, still unmoving, had activated hidden ports weapon mounts that had been invisible until now. each port aligned with perfect precision, locking on to Corthan engines, weapon nodes, and command bridges. Not a single shot was fired, but every Corthan ship received the message. You are now inside the crosshairs. On the boarding pod's console, a message appeared in perfect Corthan script, without translation assistance. The tone was clear, the words exact. You may return. No second chance. The team froze, unsure whether to proceed. Inside the dark ship, no systems responded. The hull beneath them seemed to vibrate faintly, like a heartbeat awakening. But even without any weapons firing, even without a single spoken threat, the meaning was understood. The ship did not tolerate intrusion. It was not a relic waiting to be studied. It was not dead. It was sleeping, and now it was awake. Back on Admiral Varex's bridge, the air grew heavy. His officers looked to him for orders, but he gave none. He just watched as the unknown vessel began to shift ever so slightly, rotating with ghost-like smoothness, as if aligning itself toward something in deep space. Perhaps it was watching a signal. Perhaps it was waiting for a command. No one knew. But one thing was now certain to all who had eyes on the warship. This vessel, whatever it was not alone. And if the stories of Terrans were true, if this ship was truly one of theirs, then the Corthan Armada had not just stumbled across an abandoned object. They had tripped over something ancient, something planned, and something still very much alive. Despite every warning, despite the eerie stillness of the dark warship and the silent threat of its awakened systems, the Corthan boarding team pressed forward, driven by equal parts duty and fear. As the stealth pod latched onto the warship's surface, a hatch opened without sound, as if expecting them. They entered cautiously, weapons low, eyes scanning every direction. Inside, what they found defied everything they had trained for. The walls were massive, thick as bunkers, built from an alloy their scanners couldn't identify. Not only was the structure undamaged, it looked untouched by time-polished, cold, flawless. The air inside was breathable, gravity steady, artificial lighting softly glowing along the edges, as if the ship had never powered down. The deeper they moved, the more wrong it all felt. Long corridors stretched into silence, lined with sealed bays and control panels that hummed faintly with buried power. They passed rows of cryo-chambers, some empty, others sealed unreadable. Combat pods clearly designed for rapid deployment stood ready, clean, and preloaded. No dust, no decay. It was as if the crew had stepped out only minutes ago. Near the central core, they came upon a heavy door sealed by symbols none of the Corthans recognized, except one. An old Earth sigil archived only in Forbidden's council records. They opened it, and inside, beneath a transparent dome of stasis, Gel lay a single figure, humanoid, armored, still. The chamber's readings confirmed the impossible. It was alive. Human DNA, one of the ancient ones. Before they could react, the lights changed. Soft pulses of blue spread through the walls. The engines began to hum low and deep, and the stasis field flickered. The AI silent, until now spoke in Terran. Standard, a language their translators barely understood. The seal broke, and steam hissed into the room. The figure inside stirred, then sat up, his face partially hidden behind a reinforced visor. He looked around slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim light, and then, in a calm but firm voice, asked, "How long did we sleep?" The boarding team froze, unsure whether to answer or retreat. One of them stepped forward, trying to speak, but the human didn't wait. He stood, towering over them, and walked toward the nearest interface. As two Corthan soldiers moved to restrain him, the ship responded not with weapons, but with warning. Holographic windows erupted around the room, filling the space with star maps, system coordinates, and real-time fleet data. Each display showed the same thing. Warships, dozens of them, just like this one, waking up across distant parts of the galaxy. Hidden under asteroid fields, cloaked within black holes, sleeping inside abandoned colonies. The Terran network had never died. It had waited. Commander Hallale stepped forward, placed his hand on the console, and the ship fully powered on. Lights flared softly. Engines leveled to standby. Shield systems came online. And in that moment, a pulse was sent silent, fast, far-reaching. Across the galaxy, other ships received it. One by one, they began to stir. Back in orbit above distant moons, deep in the gravity wells of collapsed stars, the sleeper fleet opened its eyes. They had not been abandoned. They had not been forgotten. Commander Hallale turned back to the Corthan crew. "We were never gone," he said, "only waiting." The aliens stood stunned, understanding now that they hadn't found a relic. They had awakened a signal, a command chain that had never truly ended. This ship, and the others like it, were not artifacts of a lost war. They were the quiet heartbeat of a species that had chosen patience over surrender. And now, with one human awake and many more to follow, the stars would remember the name they had tried to erase: Terran. The galaxy had always relied on information moving faster than fleets, but no one expected the news of the Terran awakening to spread like a wildfire through deep space before even the Corthan Armada had time to respond. Within hours of Commander Hale's reactivation, listening posts on the edges of multiple empires began detecting strange signals, quiet pulses, echoing in dead frequencies, encoded in a language not used for over 200 years. At first, communication officers assumed it was static, some old beacon caught in a gravitational echo. But then the signals started forming patterns, repeatable, rhythmic, unmistakably artificial. Across trade hubs and naval relays, engineers scrambled to decode the transmissions, only to realize that they were written in a format no system had used in generations. Terran military code. Not one, but dozens of ghost pings were suddenly detected, appearing near major supply lines, border defense stations, and long-forgotten star lanes. At each location, Revenant-class warships uncloaked, massive, dark, and silent, each one a perfect twin to Hale's vessel, each one moving with ghost-like precision into positions that made no tactical sense until someone realized the pattern. They were watching, not attacking, not scanning, not speaking, just observing. Galactic defense fleets across 5 sectors entered emergency status, but none dared fire. The memory of what happened with Hale's ship was still fresh. Even a small action might trigger something irreversible. When the Corthan envoy was finally granted audience with Commander Hallale aboard the warship, he didn't speak with anger or demand. He simply told them the truth. After the failed council purge centuries ago, when humanity was declared hostile and marked for extinction, Earth activated its final Plan 1 that had never been recorded in council archives. It was called the Cold Protocol. Under it, humanity built sleeper fleets, warships designed to vanish into deep space, hidden across systems, buried beneath false signals, silent and invisible. Each ship was placed under the command of a single Terran officer, trained not to seek revenge or conquest, but to wait. These commanders were put into deep cryo-sleep, and their ships entered standby, programmed to awaken only if a Terran signature was detected again in the galaxy, either through memory or threat. Hallale explained calmly that these ships were not built to invade, but to remind the stars that Earth was never gone, only silent by choice. The revelation shook the Corthan leadership to its core. Some high-ranking admirals called for an immediate strike, arguing that if humanity was returning, it must be stopped before it grew strong again. But others, older, wiser, warned that no one had ever seen Terran technology at full power. If Hale's ship was just one of many, and those many were already awake, and even a massive strike might not be enough. Debates raged inside strategy, halls and across communication grids, but while the galaxy argued, the Terran presence only grew. New ghost signals were detected every hour. Civilian ships began reporting sightings of dark silhouettes in the distance. Some of the more remote colonies woke to find Revenant-class ships hovering high in orbit, never communicating, never threatening, just existing like silent giants above their skies. On black market networks and encrypted comms, a phrase began to spread, not official, but repeated enough to gain power. If this is the first one, how many more are waiting? The fear wasn't from what the humans had done, but from what they hadn't. They had reappeared without a single shot, and still entire fleets were frozen. Not because of strength, but because of patience. Because somewhere, deep in every officer's gut, there was a growing understanding that the galaxy hadn't prepared for this. Not a return in force, but a return in silence. In systems where old stories of humans had become myths, people now remembered the warning signs. The stories once told to frighten cadets now sounded like historical fact. Humanity hadn't vanished. It had chosen to disappear. And now it was. Choosing to come back, not with words, but with presence. Halle, when asked by the Corthan envoy what his orders were, said only this: observe, record, do not act unless provoked. When asked how many more ships existed like his, he didn't answer. He didn't have to. By then, even the outermost trading posts had started reporting unidentified vessels in orbit, all matching the same quiet design. No one could say how far the cold protocol had reached. No one knew if Earth itself had remained quiet or was preparing to speak. But in every command center, one truth began to settle like cold air. The stars had miscalculated. The silence wasn't absence. It was warning. A silence that had lasted centuries and now echoed louder than war. Commander Halle stood once more upon the bridge of his warship, the Revenant, surrounded by quiet systems and soft pulses of data that hummed through walls like a beating heart slowly returning to life. Outside, the mighty Corthan Armada, dozens of dreadnoughts and hundreds of cruisers, remained in full formation, but none dared move. Their weapons were primed, their shields active, but it was fear, not orders, that held them still. Hale's expression was calm, his eyes watching the static screen that displayed the growing spread of Terran signals across the stars. All across the galaxy, one by one, the sleeper ships of Earth, once scattered and hidden in shadow, came online. They did not fire. They did not demand. They simply appeared. From deep space currents to forgotten moons, from abandoned orbital stations to asteroid belts that no longer appeared empty, Terran warships hovered like silent judges. None of them broadcast commands. None of them requested surrender. Instead, each one lit a single beacon, an old Terran transmission signal, known only to historians and those who once feared the humans of the past. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. In the dark, and on every world where it was detected, the message was identical. We are not here to conquer. But we are no longer hiding. Remember who we are. It was sent in every major language, every frequency, repeated 3 times, and then ended. No further communication followed. No conditions, no threats, just a message in silence. But that silence spoke louder than any declaration of war. In the great cities of the Vortari Confederacy, alarms were raised, but no action was taken. On the rim worlds of the Thal Axis, civilian ships were grounded, trade suspended, and military officers debated whether this was a bluff or a new beginning. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, yet no agreement could be reached. Some urged diplomacy, others whispered of preemptive strikes, but all of them knew the truth deep down. The humans were not reacting, they were revealing. They had always been there, hidden under layers of space, dust, and time, waiting for the galaxy to remember, or forget, or fear. Hale, standing in the heart of his ship, watched the responses come in, not official messages, but quiet shifts in traffic. Entire regions paused their shipping lanes. Patrols were called back from borders. Battleships drifted off their assigned routes. No one said the words, but across thousands of systems, fleets, and governments had reached the same conclusion. These ships, these humans, had chosen to appear now, not by accident, but by design. And yet, they had done nothing aggressive. That, more than anything, terrified the galaxy. Because if humanity had wanted to strike, they had the advantage. They were already here, and they were already awake. In the dark halls of power, leaders spoke in hushed voices, wondering how many ships had truly survived, how many systems now held Terran ghosts watching silently. No one knew. And Commander Hale gave no further answers. He simply remained on the bridge, watching the screen, arms behind his back, silent as his ship continued to hover above the Korthan fleet. Minutes passed, hours, then cycles, but the standoff never changed. And yet, in the silence, a new phrase began to spread, not from military reports or broadcasts, but from frightened whispers between soldiers and traders and captains alike. It began as a rumor, then a truth, then something no one dared question. Their first glimpse was enough. None of us want to see what comes next. And so, the galaxy held its breath, not in defeat, not in surrender, but in a stillness shaped by one terrible understanding. Humanity had returned, and they had not come for war. But if pushed, no one doubted they would finish it.